The 1% is not about arrival, though that's what we admire. The 1% is about how you and I show up every single day to do the things that God Himself has called us to do. Admiration, you guys, is easy, but it's also freaking frustrating. Wouldn't you rather learn to apply the 1% mentality to your life so you can start being one that is admired? Not just for your arrival, but for your pursuit, for the character that it takes to get there, for the tenacity, for the resilience, for the grit. What's up, everybody? Ryan James Miller. Welcome back to Unlocking Greatness. Have you ever thought about the fact that though you admire the fruit, you often ignore the fight that it took for somebody to get there? You know, we often admire the 1%. We often admire those that have achieved some incredible level of success. And maybe it's not even the upper echelon billionaire type of person. I mean, maybe it's just the person down the street. Maybe it's the guy that we grew up with. Maybe it's our mastermind partner. Maybe it's a friend at church. But we look at them and we think to ourselves, man, they have achieved so, I mean, it is incredible. Look at all that they have. Look at how happy they are. Look at how fulfilled that they are. We admire so much of what's around us. And there's not even anything really wrong with that, except for the fact that we often ignore what it really took to get there. And so what I want to do is I want to help us pull back the curtain on what it really takes to achieve the type of success that most people only dream about in marriage, in business, in health, and even in our faith. And spoiler alert, it's not about luck. It's not about hype. It's hard work anchored in faith. Look, this is going to be, and not that all of my episodes aren't, but this is going to be very direct and very real, because I think many of us have an incredible opportunity to do far more than we're doing right now, not for the sake of doing more, but fulfilling this calling that we have on our life. And as the result of that type of fulfillment, we become fulfilled. So a couple of things that I want to address and really help us walk through. First off is this illusion of instant success. Now, I think most of us are realists. I think most of us get it, but I still think that we have confused visibility with value. What people see as the outcome is not the endurance. Eric Thomas, who he is a very profound speaker, a motivational speaker. He's an author, a trainer. He works with a lot of the NFL teams. He's a fire, just a fire plug of a guy. And he says everybody wants to be great until it's time to do what greatness requires. And I just can't agree with that statement anymore. We may admire somebody's success from the outside, and we may recognize that it takes a lot of work, but I don't think that we understand just how much work it would require of us to do it. And so we will continue to hope, we will continue to dream, but rarely will we consistently do. We want to be on vacation, but we don't want to put in the extra work. We want the jacked and ripped body, but we don't want to stop eating garbage and get up every day and go work out. We want the strong marriage, but we don't want the difficult conversations that are required of it. You know, in our Men of Greatness framework, there's an acronym that we have created around greatness, and two of the key words there are resilience, that's the R, and tenacity, that is the T. In order to become part of the 1%, whether that's income or outcome or achievement, whatever that is, in order to set yourself apart in such a way that you are better than 99% of the population, you have got to build a significant level of resilience and tenacity in order to get where those people that we admire are. Zechariah 4:10 says, "Do not despise these small beginnings, for the Lord rejoices to see the work begin." Sometimes we get so incredibly hyped up, we get so fired up, we get so excited, we're finally going to get after it, we're finally going to be part of the 1%, but we're frustrated because we're making micro progress. And God here through the prophet Zechariah is speaking to the people of Israel, and he's saying, don't despise these little things. All of these things are building blocks towards who I have created you to be. All of these things are simple individual steps towards the promised land that I've created you to be in. And I believe that he would share the same thing with us. Do not despise the day to day. Do not get discouraged by the small incremental work, but get after it and work hard every single day. You see, the world around us glorifies abundance, glorifies glamour, it glorifies all these outlandish achievements. But again, hard work, the hard work that grows greatness, the hard work that is required of greatness, it's rarely Instagrammable. All that stuff along the way isn't going to show up in anybody's highlight reel until they've achieved the success, and then they will go back and show you the journey it took them to get there. But along the way, rarely do people glorify that stuff because it's so freaking hard, and it can actually be so discouraging at times. But we need to know this stuff. We need to understand this stuff. If we're going to commit and aspire to something greater, we're going to have to understand that it's never going to be easy. And that this is common sense. And I know you would agree with me here. And yet you and I are still getting frustrated because we aren't achieving the things that other people are achieving, or we haven't achieved the things that other people have achieved. And I'm not even getting into the discussion around whether or not God has ordained for us to achieve the same things. That's a whole different topic of discussion. But what I am saying is if we ever aspire to greater things than we are accomplishing, achieving, or have right now, we are going to have to realize that it's going to have to require us starting small, being habitual and disciplined every single day. Another thing that we need to recognize is that almost every individual, every story of greatness, every story of success was built. It wasn't gifted. This isn't about trust funds. This isn't about hand-me-downs. This is about getting after it and doing the hard work that most people won't do, the hard work that 99% won't do. I mean, we look to some of these incredibly successful people, these hard workers, the influencers that we follow, and we're like, oh my gosh, I want the grit. I want the tenacity like David Goggins. Oh, I want the podcast like Joe Rogan. Oh, I want the views like whatever. It's like we see all these things and we want all these things, but we recognize that none of these people were an overnight success. Now, maybe when we started following them, they had 1 million followers and now they have 3 million and we're like, oh my gosh, look at what they grew. But we have no idea how hard they worked to get to the first 100. How many years, decades even. This for me is very, very relevant to my marriage. So recently, I was having a conversation with a friend of mine, and he was sharing with me that he was having a lot of trouble in his relationship. He's dating this girl. He loves her dearly, and he wants to propose to her. He wants to get married, but they're really struggling. And he said, he was just being honest, and I appreciate it. He said one of the things that was so frustrating to him is looking at what I'm posting on Instagram about my marriage. And I get it. When I'm in a dark place, when I'm frustrated, when I'm not getting all I want out of my business, out of my marriage, out of my finances, out of my health, and I see other people that have quote unquote arrived, I get frustrated too. I get discouraged too. I can even start to envy those people and get angry at them. And I had a conversation with him and I said, I said, first of all, I said, God has designed different things for you and I. And I don't know what he has for you in that specific relationship, overall in your relationships. But I said, more than that, I said, yeah, you're seeing that after 24 years of marriage, I am happier in my relationship than I've ever been. My relationship is more fruitful than it's ever been. My sex life is better than it has ever been. 24 years into my marriage. And every single time I say my marriage is better than it's ever been, I wake up tomorrow and I feel even better than I did the day before. It's true. But what most people don't understand is there was months, years, damn near a decade of struggle between Michelle and I. What started off in an incredibly positive way in 2001 quickly took a turn. The quote unquote honeymoon phase wore off. And all of a sudden, we were struggling to communicate. We were fighting over dumb things. We had misaligned expectations. We weren't engaged in as much romantic and sexual interaction with each other. Most people in my life today weren't there for that. They weren't around the nights that I was sick to my stomach thinking about what it was going to be like to get a divorce. They didn't understand how afraid I was of losing my daughter or losing, like full-time relationship with my daughter. They weren't with me in the times that I was so angry and frustrated and didn't know what to do with it. They weren't around when I was so angry and so frustrated that I would turn and make choices to go do really dumb stuff to try and numb the pain. They weren't around when we were yelling and screaming at each other. That wasn't days. That was years. That was hard. They weren't around when I finally decided that I had to give it all over to Jesus. They weren't around when I was confronted with the reality of how horrible of a husband I had been at times to my wife. And they definitely weren't around for every single difficult conversation, humiliating moment when I had to own up to the words, the actions that hurt my wife, that hurt my children. No one sees that. All they see is the social media glorified good times. And I'm not trying to hide the bad ones. They just don't see it. You see, I had to fight to regain trust, respect, and intimacy in my marriage. This is why I emphasize so much the pillar of covenant connections in our Men of Greatness pillars. Because we have to work through these stages in our relationships of strengthening our bonds, of leading with love, and ultimately of building legacy into our relationships. As husbands, we have to recognize that we are to love our wives as Christ loved the church, which means we are to sacrifice our lives for our spouses. It's hard work. It doesn't come easy. It wasn't an overnight success. And so as other people look to my relationship, which I'm grateful for as an example, I always point them to two things. Number one, it was God's grace. Without the grace of God, I would not be happily married 24 years later. Secondly, I would not be happily married 24 years later unless I fully committed to being happily married for the rest of my life. That doesn't mean that we're not going to still confront challenges, but those are so few and far between, it's not even funny. My encouragement, if this is you, if you're listening to this and you are looking up to, you're desiring to have that incredible relationship, that incredible marriage, I want to encourage you that it's going to take work. You have to build those rhythms. You have to build that discipline. You have to work towards that day by day, one hard decision at a time, one more commitment, one more investment. And there's no guarantees, but if you do that for 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, you will be part of the 1% in your marriage. That I can guarantee. We know that this 1% principle, this idea that we live like we invest into, that we give over ourselves to this 1%. It's not just for our marriage. It's not just for our relationships. This moves across so many different areas of life, our businesses, our health, our faith. We have to make sure that if we desire, which I hope you do, if we desire to live like the 1%, that we are willing to give everything like the 1%. We will reap what we sow. It's not a 1-for-1 exchange, but we will gain as we give of ourselves to these areas. In business, you can't shortcut excellence. The leaders in the 1% put in deep work every single day. This is what it means to have purpose-driven leadership. I think it's some of the most successful, prevalent, prominent leaders in this world, and none of them that I have heard of were an overnight success. It's taken them years, so many incredible losses, to finally get to the place where they have achieved success. I heard Dave Ramsey share his story not too long ago, and this was him. Man, I mean, it took him a long time to get off the ground before he built the empire that he has today, and not just in financial education, but as a media company. It wasn't like that early on in the days for him. But he committed to purpose-driven leadership. He committed to the 1%. He committed to being like the 1%, to behaving like the 1%, to building like the 1%. When it comes to our health, discipline is the bridge between desire and results. And again, this supersedes all areas of life. But nobody drifts into a jacked body. Nobody drifts into high level performance in the gym, running on the road, cycling, swimming, whatever it may be. It requires discipline. You see, we admire those things. And there's this part of us that wants them, but we don't really want them because we don't want to do what it's going to take to achieve peak health like those that we admire so much. Even when it relates to our faith, this is one of the ones that's most frustrating to me. Achieving greatness, living like the 1% in our faith, we don't just believe in God. We don't even just go to church. We walk with the Lord daily, in and out of every single moment, every single thought, every single word, every single action, everything is with God. We're giving our lives over to Him. We are submitting to and obeying His call on our life. That's what it means to have a kingdom foundation. I hope you want that. But are you willing to do what it's going to take to get? If you want what the 1% have, you have to be willing to give what the 99% won't. This is what separates. This is how we truly achieve greatness. And you're probably with me to this point. You're like, yep, I get it. Yep, I want this. But we have to ask the question, why do we get it? Why do we want to pursue it, but for some reason we don't? Why do we avoid the work, though we admire it so greatly? Well, part of it could be because that's just not for us. Maybe there's some specific things that we admire that we don't feel called to, and that's totally okay. But for many of you listening, I know a lot of you that listen to this podcast, for many of you listening, you want it and you avoid it. Because for you, and sometimes for me, comfort is the enemy of calling. We want the resurrection power without carrying the cross. Why do we shy away from the hard way? Well, a couple of things come to mind for me. Number one is you're afraid to fail. Maybe you do see the chasm, the gap between where you are and what it's going to take to get to the places that you admire. And you know that it is going to produce some scars. And you're afraid to publicize that. I remember I worked with a client for quite a few years that was really successful. And the first time he failed, really in his entire adult life, after building a multi-million-dollar business, being a successful collegiate athlete, the first time he failed, he crawled into a hole, almost literally. He got stuck down in his basement, strategizing his next move, but he froze because he was so afraid to admit failure publicly and to now know that he was capable of failure. And in the fact that if he was going to aspire to anything else, he was probably going to fail again at some point and didn't know if he could deal with it. Maybe it's not fear of failure. Maybe it's shame from the past. Maybe you've made some grave mistake and you are so ashamed of what you've done that you don't believe you deserve the greatness that God is calling you to. That's a lie from the pit of hell. You know, part of the good news is God doesn't hold anything against you. There's nothing that you have done once you have repented from it that God is holding against you. Christ died for every single thing that you have done, are doing, and will do. As you turn from it, so does he. My encouragement to you would be to stare him in the eyes as you pursue that dream of greatness. That will help you to deal with the shame of the past. And finally, another reason I think that we avoid work or putting in the work necessary to be part of that 1% is because we're distracted with too many other things. Maybe you're good at a lot of stuff, and so you find yourself constantly lending yourself to all these different efforts. Maybe you're just easily distracted and you get caught up in laziness. Maybe you get caught up in leisure. Maybe you just get caught off guard too often because you're not protecting your time, you're not protecting your calling. Regardless of what it is, one of the things that I regularly teach that I think is so important for us to remember is we don't know ourselves as best as we think we do, which then requires us to honestly admit that we are not as self-aware as we could be. But by becoming more self-aware, we will grow into the greatness that God has created us for. Look, the good news is, as the Bible says, do not grow weary of doing good, because in due season you will reap if you do not give up. So, all of those negative things that could potentially be holding you back, fear of failure, shame from the past, distractions from the present, all of those things cannot hold you back if you continue to focus forward on doing good. And you may say to yourself, well, what is good, Ryan? Good is fulfilling the calling that God has on your life to achieve the greatness that he has called you to. I mean, that's ultimately what it means to become a part of the 1%. If you want to stay average, just continue to accept the discomfort. Just live it. Allow it to overwhelm you. But if you truly want to separate yourself from the average, from the 99%, and become part of the 1, learn to avoid discomfort. It's going to come, but you can just turn right around and run from it because you don't need to have anything to do with that at all. So here's 4 practical steps that I think will help you as you consider whether or not this idea of becoming a part of the 1% is for you. Because again, we admire it. Everybody wants some aspect of that in your relationships, in your faith, with your money, in your business. But you have to figure out whether or not it's for you specifically. So, a couple of things that are I believe going to be really, really helpful for you as you determine whether or not this 1% is for you. Number 1, assess the situation. Where are you admiring but not acting? And should you be acting? We have, for our men, we have an assessment called the 5 Pillars of Greatness. I'll link it down in the show notes, but that's a good way to grade how you're doing in each of the 5 key areas of life. Again, faith, relationships, health, finances, and business. And so you can take that assessment and you can figure out where you're most efficient and determine whether or not you want to grow in that area. And we give you an action guide on how to take some simple steps forward in one of those areas. But the first step in becoming part of the 1% is to determine where you're admiring and whether or not you should be acting and acting in the right way. 2 is about alignment. Does your lifestyle support the results that you want? As you take a step back and do your assessment and then look at your life, do the roles that God has called you to, parent, spouse, friend, child, worker, owner, whatever, do those roles align to the admiration that you have for the people looking around you? Does the way you live your life mirror the beginnings, right? Those baby steps, those small wins. Does your behavior mirror those things or something completely different? That's alignment. We've got to get those things in alignment. Our lifestyle has to be aligned to the path that's going to be required of us getting to that 1%. And finally, step 3 is act. So assess, align, and act. Act. My challenge to you is to be a doer, not just a hearer, not just an admirer. If you feel called to something, it's time to act. One hard thing to do every single day. This ain't about climbing the steepest mountain every single day. This isn't about getting up and running 16 miles tomorrow morning after never running before. This isn't about making 100 sales calls if you're making 0 right now. This is about doing the things that are getting in the way of you achieving the 1%. For some of you, it's as simple as praying before you check your phone every single morning. Maybe for others of you, it is so difficult for you to extend gratitude to your own life that you just find yourself constantly grumbling. And so the hardest thing for you to do would be to choose gratitude over grumbling. Maybe if you do want to celebrate 24, 34, 44 years of an incredible, fruitful marriage, maybe it's time that you do the hard thing and set a boundary to protect your time for your family. I was just talking to an entrepreneur shortly before hopping on to do this podcast, and he is the main driver for the business. He's the trainer. He's the coach. He does a lot of the marketing, though he's got a couple of team members, but he's got so much of the responsibility. I mean, he really can't afford to not show up and be present every single day. And he said he just got back from 4 days of camping with his 14-year-old son and a couple of his son's friends. That is how you become a 1%er in your relationships, specifically in his case as a father. He is willing to put boundaries to invest into his family, though it's going to cost him in the short term in his business. Here's one thing that I am confident of. The 1% is not about arrival, though that's what we admire. The 1% is about how you and I show up every single day to do the things that God himself has called us to do. Admiration, you guys, is easy, but it's also freaking frustrating. Wouldn't you rather learn to apply the 1% mentality to your life so you can start being one that is admired? Not just for your arrival, but for your pursuit, for the character that it takes to get there, for the tenacity, for the resilience, for the grit. I would love to hear this from you, by the way. What is one area of your life that you've been admiring someone else from a distance? Are you like my friend that's frustrated in his relationship but has been admiring mine? Are you like my client who so greatly admires the peers in his industry because he's constantly frustrated in his own business? What's one area, one aspect of your life that you've been admiring someone else from a distance, but now you're ready to build your own? I would love to see a comment. If you're watching this on YouTube, I would love to receive a DM on Instagram or LinkedIn or Facebook or YouTube. If this is, if you're watching this or if you're listening to this, I would love to receive a DM to hear what it is you're committing to, how you are going to move past admiration and on to action. We can be admired in the same way that we are admiring others by showing up every single day and giving our all to the things that the Lord calls us to. And so, Lord God, I pray that you would give us the courage, that you would give us the resilience, that you would give us the tenacity to stop settling and start pursuing the greatness that you have called every single one of us individually to. That though the greatness itself, the outcome looks different, the achievement of it is about the fulfillment of the purpose that you have put into our heart and into our minds. And so, Lord, would you act? Would you give us the confidence? Would you give us the courage? Would you give us the will to do so? Pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.